Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Today is Monday, September 9th. It is 4 p.m., and we are the African Burial Ground Memorial Park Committee. I am Chairperson Assistant Mayor Kelly, and I will go around and ask you to introduce yourself, Seal, for the record, and your organization, or if you are just a resident member.
My name is Daria Steele, and I'm with the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire.
I'm Gina Bowker. I'm with the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire.
I'm Sue Sterry, and I'm with the Portsmouth Cemetery Committee.
I'm Dee Forte, and also with the Portsmouth Cemetery Committee.
Okay, thank you. So we have review and approve. Do we have enough for quorum? I don't know if we can vote on anything.
I think we're
Okay.
one short, but we'll just hold them for the next.
We'll just
meeting.
hold.
It's not a big deal.
Yep, anything that needs to be voted on, we will hold for the next meeting, but we can still have discussion. So we will skip to number 3. The big topic, as we all know, is the repair and replacement of the vault cover. I believe everyone who's here right now had a chance to go and look at the cover and the large slabs of, I guess, tester that Corin had, that Jerome had discussed with him. So I will open up to just general group conversation if we want to talk about that. Sue?
Yeah, I'd like to make a suggestion. Corin doesn't know I went down and talked to these people, but he won't have a problem with that. I know him well enough after 4 years that I guess the consensus was that
We did
nobody
not
liked
like
what
it.
it was. And so discussion came about not at that meeting, but between Corin and Jerome, and he wants feedback. Corin would like feedback from the committee. This is a 4x4 tile. If you don't look where the Home Depot is, that's a 3x3 tile. And these are roughly the same size as, because I took some tiles from there, as what's on there right now. And I got these because I wanted to compare colors. I talked to a specialist today about outdoor tiling, and the 2 boards I brought are definitely outdoor, made for outdoor.
Awesome.
They can be made any color that we would like. These look a little bit bigger. I don't know if they have a little bit smaller. But what he said was the major things that could have went wrong with that were the wrong type of tile being used here, too much mortar being on the base, and what was the third thing? And also, it doesn't look like they did any grouting in
It's
between.
scoring, yeah.
They look like they just pushed them into mortar, which would also not be helpful
For
if it's not the right time of a right type of grout. Also, what he said is it's not that expensive to get these done and to even try to match these the colors that we have now. I personally like the design that's there. I would hate to see it changed if we really don't have to change it. And secondly, I'm a big proponent of if there's a problem in your city, then we need to work with people here that know about it. So I would recommend that we at least look at getting someone down there and looking at it and working with them to get a price on what it would cost to retile the situation. We might be able to use, they set it up almost like, a mosaic usually is attached on the back, and I asked if it would make any difference if they were attached, and he said, no, not really. He said the key to the whole thing is the installation, so that all 3 things were appropriate, that it should stay no matter what. So to him, it sounded more like something in the process wasn't correct. And I wasn't here when that all happened, so I don't know what kind of tile, who installed them, and what they used. So that was my second thought, was if we could find out in the paperwork who did it, what types of materials were used, then we would have that information to compare and see if we can solve the problem here with a local tile specialist. So
Thanks, Sue.
that's my, it's not a motion, it's
No,
mine.
yeah.
But again, this would be the 3-inch, which
Yep.
that would just look, and we could get any color that we wanted.
Yep.
But, and then I just love the design that's there.
Well, I think that's one of the things when we were all down there talking about was the fact that those tiles are plastic and not either ceramic or porcelain or an outdoor tile. And I think, the
Porcelain is outdoor.
was the takeaway was, I mean, you can see, when they pop off that it was kind of just like placed and set. And I know at the last meeting we discussed too, making sure that we have some input from somebody regionally to make sure that we can connect them with Jerome for installation and maintenance. So you kind of hit it right on the head.
I'm
think
just
it's
curious, do we need to include, I'm not trying to
Yep.
exclude, I'm just saying, do we need to include him if we're just replacing what's there? I mean, can we keep everything local but just let him know that's what we're doing? I don't know what
Yeah.
the agreement is.
I'd look to Suzanne, but I would say we at least, because it's his art, we want to have him included in every step of it, whether that means that we say to him, or they're within the conversation, it's, hey, we have found someone locally who specializes in outdoor tile in New England, and we are going to connect you with them to make sure that the final product is still within the realm of the art that was designed and selected. But I think it has to be some type of merger.
I just didn't, not knowing everything, I didn't want to step on his feet or
No,
whatever. If
absolutely.
he was going to be upset if we didn't use someone local as far as, I mean, I know-
Manufacturing and fabric,
Right.
yeah.
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 I didn't think he was going to come up and install them, but I didn't
No.
know how.
And again, I think the biggest disconnect has been that, this installation is in New England, and it's a rough weather, wear and tear, and so finding out some dynamic for that.
Sorry,
Tina?
I just want to clarify in my brain. The guy you're talking about is saying that he can use the same size small tiles.
Right.
Okay.
These are,
They're slightly,
they're slightly bigger,
roughly
but.
the same size. Okay,
but you can
yeah.
see the depth on on
They're
that board.
thicker, but
Right.
Yeah.
but they're roughly the same size.
This is just a sample.
Yeah.
I
I just was trying to, because just with the variety of sizes there, I just wanted to make sure that I was understanding
Right,
it correctly.
and I told him I would bring him a couple samples, so, again, we can work something out with him, and not just him, go to a couple
Yeah.
places and
Yeah.
find out what's what. But like I said, I'd like to know what we did use officially, and Corin would probably have those over at DPW, or someone at
Somewhere. Yep, we could look at them.
And was the installation done via
Locally.
Jerome?
It
or
was done locally.
It was.
Done
by
locally.
local people.
Local people, okay.
Yeah, I think Piscataqua did.
Piscataqua was
Yeah.
in charge, and
Yeah.
Granite people, Swenson Granite, were involved. So
Yeah.
that's why I think it bears a little bit more checking, because
Yeah.
it was done by local.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I knew it.
Was the material selection done locally, or was that done via
Well,
Jerome?
would specify the material, but
Right.
all the hardscape
Yep.
was local.
Yeah.
Local New Hampshire material.
Yep.
yeah.
No, my son-in-law actually his company worked on the project down in there, so.
Because one of the things
too.
we kept talking about is none of the other tile has had any issues.
That's what this
Just the
gentleman said
mosaic.
too, that somewhere in the process, something wasn't, too much mortar, not enough, whatever, yeah.
So I'm happy to take back from this to do a little more digging, and I think, if it's the committee's interest, Corin and I, and as needed, can talk to Jerome and say, hey, we think this should be explored, and see if this is a viable option, if the committee wants to do that, to see, could we go and be more authentic to your original artistic vision,
Yeah.
and just double check that there isn't, that we're not missing an opportunity.
And that felt like consensus from everyone that we want to keep the mosaic aspect of the design, and obviously the original design, but the mosaic aspect and the coloring of the original design.
Let me ask this. So as long as you're not in a rush, we can do some investigation following up on this and kind of Jerome's input and see what the original, if we can track down the original contract documents and kind of see maybe it was the wrong tile that was spec'd or something. And then report back to this committee and kind of get the thumbs up or thumbs down. The other option is also, I think Jerome has offered to maybe get the bigger, like a sample of the bigger 4x4.
Yep.
Color sample and send those up to us. But again, who's going to install it? So I think maybe it's making that connection so that if we don't have confidence at the end of the day that the small tiles can be successfully, used in the restoration, that we have kind of a conversation immediately thereafter about the larger ones, just so that we can get things moving.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be glad to
Yeah. Sue, thank you so much for,
take it on with Corin.
if we can make sure that we share, just so we know, we all are on the same line of making sure who we know the vendors are, that we can keep
Right,
track
yeah.
of as we start to
Yeah.
send, if we start to get quotes in X, Y, and Z, we know that who
Yeah, so we'll talk.
we've talked to.
With Corin and, yep.
Because my son-in-law actually laid all the big pieces of granite down there. And then from Piscataqua, Scott, he worked on the Sankofa, and he
Yeah.
works with my son-in-law now. So
That's cool.
I should be able to get some information from them too as well. But they were concerned about some of the things
Yeah.
that happened, so.
And it's all, I feel like it's such a beautiful piece of art that, every time there's an installation of something, there could go wrong. And we've had a good amount of years, and now, the goal of this committee right now and as the community is to revitalize this and then be good. Okay. Any more committee about that? Any more committee? Just the committee's work. Okay. So we'll go on to number 4, which is really exciting. The collaboration with the cemetery committee on other known or unknown slave cemeteries. So this was brought up in discussion about the Episcopal Church and the known slave graveyard there, and figuring out what our next steps are as the cemetery committee and as the African Burial Ground committee. And essentially this would be something that we will have to vote on because it will be outside of our purview as a committee. So we would vote to essentially change the, Susan, I guess, like the,
That's it.
to add
Talk
it
about
to our,
add to the mission.
yeah, to add it to the mission statement. But I would look to Sue and Dee to maybe talk a little bit more about what we know is out there. I know that PHA has acknowledged that something is there, and they're willing to kind of work with the city and in our committee and cemetery committee to make sure nothing is disturbed, but also to make sure that we can grant some public access to this.
Yeah, so we know the one on Lafayette it is there. Others?
The only other one I had mentioned was out on Ocean Road.
Ocean.
And the families was a year and a half ago very agreeable. I'm sure they still are, because they do have people knocking on their door occasionally asking whether they think it's an Indian, Native American, or a black cemetery. So, yeah. Well, we're interested. The one on Ocean Road's not so bad because it's still on the property
Yeah.
of. My concern with the Episcopal Church, I don't want to see with the reconstruction that they come within 25 feet of the whole thing, which is a big issue with a lot of contractors. The headstones are there, but still.
So maybe we need to set up a meeting with them as we.
Yeah, I believe they have all their
Site plan, yeah, they
approvals.
do.
And so what we can do is probably handle that to some degree administratively.
Yep.
Typically, well, for our projects downtown, we do what's called a CMMP, as you know, to help manage traffic. This is a little different because it's, more interior. But let me see if we can find a good mechanism to make sure, whether it's what we often do for our projects when there are archaeological sites that we're protecting, it's very clearly marked off for the contractors as part of the construction. And so let me just see what has already been documented in the plan set as part of that construction effort to demarc the buffer zone, if you will, from that.
Yeah, because I noticed up on Peverly Hill, they've marked off where they think there used to be graves, but the building is definitely not 25. It's
feet.
not sitting right on the border, but it's not 25 feet away either. It's from the edge of the graves,
Yep.
so.
And then, would we then,
I can report back at the next
yeah.
meeting. How's that?
yeah, and this would be Suzanne Sue question, because I know you guys have done so much with the cemetery committee. So then what would be the next process? Does this then fall under the envelope of the city cemeteries? Or is our hope to that, or just acknowledge, make sure it's protected? Or do we want to put it under I guess that would, where does that fall under, like the RSA statutes of what we as a city have to do?
So there are a lot of private cemeteries.
Yes.
I think what we're looking for is to ensure a protection and be
Yes.
public access.
Okay.
And so let me work and see what's already been written and put into the plans.
Okay.
Because there may already be notes in the plan set, and certainly Vincent
Yep.
often is the person out in the field, kind of checking some things along with Dave DeFosis and other staff, looking at, the construction sequence and how things are going. So
Okay.
I will have a report back.
Yeah, I mean, we always include in anything that we put out, we do include the African Burial Ground
yep.
Memorial. But it's really, that's fine. I'm just saying, in my mind, I look at it as a cemetery burial
Yes.
site. So that's
Right.
why I always think of it that way. So
I agree with you.
it's just always protected. I know it will be, but it seems like, if
The
we're all
encroachment of
together,
it.
then
Yep.
we'll just add it.
And I know that, like I said, I've talked to PHA, and they, and I know it's probably on the site plan, I just haven't seen it. They acknowledge the buffer that is needed, and they acknowledge doing the right thing of protecting that space.
25 way, yeah.
Yeah.
The other, in terms of the two committees kind of working together, or at least having a similar or conversations, Dinah Chase Whipple's
Yes.
Oh, right, yeah.
memorial, which is going to be hopefully sometime in the spring. And I know I talked with the family members and wanting to make sure as we find the date where that is going to happen, that there's a lot of good communication to take advantage of the opportunity to tell the story and really recognize the acknowledgement of the contribution, in the community. And I know the family is planning to work with Black Heritage Trail, and what I offer to the family is also, as this moves forward, then there's probably an opportunity, because school would be in session, to figure out which teachers would be, appropriate to kind of maybe have some intersection or involvement, just to, it's an opportunity.
Heighten awareness. I think,
Awareness. Thank you.
I think that this leads to an opportunity for heightened awareness for a lot of our Black historical figures, our historical figures of color that are buried in our cemeteries. And so maybe this is something that we can do to kick off, whether that's a marker with the Black Heritage Trail or something within the city, so that we can pay acknowledgement to these individuals.
Just for my clarification, the Heritage Trail is all through New Hampshire, right?
Yeah, yes.
That's what I thought.
Yep.
And the other thing, is Laurel the one from California?
Yes.
Well, I ran into her at the Athenaeum on last Saturday.
She's
Or-
from New Jersey, but
Oh,
She's currently living in California.
yeah, she's living in California, yeah.
last time I talked to her, she was in New Jersey. That's
Well, she was here in
They were here. She was here for the 30th anniversary thing for Valley
Yes.
Cunningham.
Yeah.
Yeah. I ran into her in the Athenaeum, and she gave me a lot of great clues, because we're doing a dedication to Catherine Moffett Ladd Whipple on the 21st, if anyone wants to be there at 11. And she's just thrilled. We get to talk a lot and with the plan, and she thought it was so much better than just
Rushed in.
in in there. So
Yeah, we were. There was a little bit of freak out. We were like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, wait, in a week
Yeah.
and a half?
Yeah.
What? No.
yeah.
But the day after a major Black Heritage Trail
Trail
event,
event.
I was like, if we have to,
Yeah.
but we'd rather not.
Yeah, because the Black Heritage Trail.
Huge thing the day before for Valerie and
the 30th
we're like,
anniversary.
The 30th anniversary was
yeah.
the day before that they were
Yeah.
gonna. They're like,
Try to
we're
do
gonna
it.
do it because
Because everyone's in town.
everyone's in town, and we're like,
Yeah.
if we have to, but
Yeah.
it's not ideal.
Well, and there is a nice,
Yeah.
marker there right now.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
I don't feel, it's not like it's still bare down there. So, yeah. All the more reason so that we all know what each other's
doing. Yeah. Okay, so we have some report backs that we'll get for the next meeting.
Yep.
Any other business before we move on to public comment? Actually, I had one question.
Yep.
If we could get we don't need just a report back on what the balance of the trust fund is.
I meant to get that
It's
before
okay.
I arrived.
It's okay.
here.
I should have emailed you earlier about it because I know we were talking about it.
Yep.
Just so that we know.
Not a lot.
It's not a lot. So as we get these quotes in, as we have to start thinking about fundraising ideas and things like that, there also has been some discussion, and maybe we should get with Councillor Cook of what is deemed public art, and where in this could some of the public art funds potentially be used. So that is kind of a bigger conversation that we'll tee up, and we'll get with the Public Art Review Committee, and we'll get with city staff and kind of talk about that also. I view this as public art, even though it does have its own trust, but trying to figure out too some long-term funding mechanisms to make sure there's always a little bit of a balance. I would assume no matter how great of an installation is, in 20, 30 years, everything needs a little bit of a refresh and a touch-up, especially to keep it strong and bright. Okay, if there's no other
I
business.
do have other business.
Please hit me.
So if it's okay with the chair, I'm thinking we should talk about maybe reinvigorating the conversation with the University of New Hampshire about possibly having them curate the small bit of teeth and a couple of items that were intentionally by the committee not reinterred at the time in case at some point there wanted to be some type of testing. As the technology and science changes, as the community and what its interests are changed, that at least they would be set aside and available. And I think that is, I wanted to get past the Sankofa, sort of immediate thing, but I would love to bring that back to the committee to see, is that a path we should go towards so that we could have an appropriate place to keep, unless there's a decision to do something different.
Okay.
So
So that will be on our next agenda. That will be a top item on our next agenda because that will need a vote by the committee after discussion, or a vote for a report back and then more discussion. Perfect. Thank you. And now we will go to public comment. So if you are in the audience and you'd like to come and speak, feel free to come up to the mic, introduce yourself. I know. Yeah. Come. Questions, anything you have. Just make sure you state your name and your address for the record, please.
My name is John Robinson. I live at 45 Lincoln Avenue in Portsmouth. And my background is in archaeology, so I appreciate some of what's been said here. I'm just curious to know whether any kind of official survey work, archaeological survey work, has been done around these plots that we're talking about. Does anybody know? Or?
yeah, so there is a fairly detailed archaeological report that was done at the time that the remains on Chestnut Street were discovered.
Oh, okay. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the one that's proposed on Lafayette Road, that site there.
So I am not aware that there has been any archaeological work at that site.
Right. I was
There's some
thinking-
historical records, I think, that have been gathered to provide some information, but not an actual, investigation involving digging that I'm aware of.
I would suggest that that be done before the bulldozers go in there. If you're only going to leave 25 feet around the perimeter of it, you might, depending upon what's found in the survey, you might want to expand that. And once the diggers are going, there's not much you can do about it, right?
Yeah, and that's where I had the question of where the threshold is of the private property and the cemetery and grave on it versus where, you know what I mean, what the city can and cannot
That's all in RSA
say.
289.
Yeah. So we'll have to,
Which, cemetery committee is really familiar with, so. Are you talking about digging outside the,
Doing survey work, doing some sampling around the graveyard.
yes,
as-
not
as
inside the
well.
brick wall, outside the wall?
I don't know what they'd have permission to excavate inside the wall. You might
No,
wanna
you
put-
wouldn't. In the
you
state
might-
of New Hampshire, it's a 25-foot radius around the whole,
Oh, so an
here's-
archaeologist couldn't even sample it?
no, that's not
We
true.
could.
Oh,
Yes.
so they could
Yeah.
sample
Yes.
it? Okay, well, that.
But no,
That's why I was
permission.
asking you if you were talking about inside. There's a stone wall out there, so if you're talking
Right.
about inside or within the 25-foot radius on the outside, because the state,
Both, if possible.
because I've worked with a state archaeologist, and the reason for the 25-foot, obviously, is because people could have been buried outside
Right.
of the wall.
Right.
So,
but if there was going to be an archaeological study, it would
As it goes.
It would be within that
Some
that
restrictions
route.
there, yeah. Also, I was wondering about the Whipple, what's the Whipple tie-in here? Is there, were they slave owners?
oh, I
Whipple
think
family?
I think I just brought them up just to let them know that we were
Yes,
going
yeah.
to honor Catherine Whipple, who her husband William Whipple is buried there, and they're going the descendants of the signers of the
Buried where?
Yes, but there
North
was
Cemetery.
Oh, okay.
there's Prince Whipple
Prince Whipple
is buried.
is buried Prince and Dinah Whipple lived in Portsmouth. They were enslaved. You tell us about Prince and Dinah Whipple.
They were enslaved.
They were enslaved in the area to the Moffat at the Moffat Lads.
Oh,
To the
okay.
Moffat Lads.
Yes, and so so
that's the-
Prince Whipple has a marker. If you go
Oh, is it
towards
stone?
the
It's
left.
stone? Really?
Correct.
Nice.
And so now there's the descendants in the community are putting a marker for her.
Memorial?
A memorial for her, a headstone for her. And so if you actually go to the cemetery and you're looking at the what's it called?
Tomb.
The
Barrel
tomb, and you walk to the left and up above it. Prince Whipple is right there, very prominently buried next to the tomb, and then Dinah is next to him. There's a space.
Flag pole is, that's where William Whipple is, and Prince is like just to the left down the
Yes.
hill, like.
Yeah.
It's good to acknowledge it.
And
Acknowledge them anyway,
Yes.
Catherine Whipple.
Dinah.
No, I was going to talk about Catherine Moffat Ladd Whipple. She supported those, supported Dinah, right? Am I?
Yep.
Supported Dinah after, where she opened the first black or African school here in New Hampshire.
Hampshire.
That we were one of the first.
1830 or something like that.
18.
No, back in the 1800s.
1830 was when it was.
Oh, I
I thought you said 19.
Yeah, I said 19. Anyway, the descendants of the people who signed the Declaration of Independence have a plaque on William Whipple's site. Now they're doing one for Catherine, and that will be this month. They will come up and do a dedication to her. And then when Dinah's headstone, which hasn't arrived, gets here sometime, then in the spring, we'll
Have a service or something.
service, yeah.
Sounds good. And I also had a question about whether the Heritage Trail ends at the border or can it extend into Kittery?
It extends into Kittery. We have
does.
markers at, well, to some extent, depending on the connection, it extends the border. We have a marker at Rock Rest, both in Kittery, downtown Kittery, and in Kittery Point for Rock Rest, because there is connection with families in New Hampshire with Rock Rest.
Is there-
There needs to be a New Hampshire connection to go into Maine.
Okay,
over
well,
the border generally.
Would that connection be just Portsmouth as a port, where ships from someone who happened to live in Kittery park their ships? Is that close enough? Or?
Well, I mean, I know there's been a lot of discussion, especially like with Pepperell and some of the
Exactly what I was
undocumented
thinking.
That would
illegal slave trade
Yes.
that's been
have to be
Exactly.
brought up, I think, to our martyr committee, and our
Yeah.
historians would have to discuss that.
But I know that there's been a lot of, well, a couple years ago, there was a lot of conversation about it in Kittery, and then it kind of crescendoed down and people.
Have you
But
been in the house there?
no,
Pepperell House?
I've not. But there's been a lot of
Breathtaking.
yeah.
Yeah, it goes 3 stories underground.
Oh,
And
really?
That's where they kept their 18 slaves.
Yeah.
Our,
And
Yeah,
our
it was.
marker coordinator can definitely send you the marker application if you're interested in it. And you can get that process going, and it can go to our marker committee, and they can discuss.
Okay, well, it's on the National Register of Historic Places. So that means that it has to be open to the public, I believe, 2 weeks out of the year, every year. And I thought some recognition of the slaves having lived there would be important for people to see.
So you said on a national registry, our cemeteries are on that, but if it's a building, it has to be open 2 weeks out of the
I
year?
believe so, yeah.
Oh, cool.
They're
I didn't know
safe
that, yeah.
registered, yeah.
I only work with dead people. Outside.
Okay. Any other public comment? Thank you so much, John.
Well, yeah, my comment is that
Yes.
I'm really delighted. Not, those were questions, I guess,
Yeah.
more or less, that you want to reconstruct the original tile work, the original mosaic.
Yeah. I think that's pretty consensus around that.
I want to first of all apologize for us being late. I had car trouble.
It's okay.
It's a new car, and I didn't know what that letter stood for. Call the seller.
Yes, don't worry.
I do apologize.
We can recap real quickly. We didn't have a quorum in the beginning, so all votes will be moved to the next meeting. We discussed, pretty much everyone, I think, went to the site, either with Corn or on their own, that we really wanted to stick with the mosaic style. And now we are
Pull some of the tiles.
we're going to be looking at different options and discussing, staff is going to discuss with Jerome of some other options. It was pretty unanimous that no one wanted those big pieces. So we're going to have a report back at our next meeting of some of the options, and we're going to try to look through records to find out what installation process was used, what mortar, what X, Y, and Z, as much as we can, 16 years ago.
I really do apologize because
It's okay.
Chief and I went right after the meeting
Yep.
and looked, and she, I thought, had some really very interesting comments and about color given from the African culture.
Mm-hmm.
So if we could give her a chance to talk about that, and I apologize, I have to regress.
No, it's
but,
okay.
No, that's
I
fine.
think it's important to be heard.
Okay. So the question will be what the purpose of this is going to be. Is it going to be to honor those who had passed, or is it going to be a mixture of honoring them but also making it a tourist attraction? That's one of the things. And I didn't think I was going to make it, so I have a flyer, or well, some information about the meaning of color. You can pass it on. And I know that the artist was.
If there's not enough, I can share.
One more.
Just one.
So the artist was leaning towards orange, and the reason why orange is usually used as a backdrop of many things because of the soil in Africa is kind of a reddish orange. So you see that kind of orange terracotta things behind it. But if you want to honor someone, you can use the orange or you can use white. White is a sign of purity and dignity and peace. And then we can take some of the bronze and outline that shape with it. Bronze is not going to be gold, but gold has a certain sense of richness and connection back to Africa. That's what I think anyway. So I just gave a brief about what colors generally mean in most African cultures. Ghana, West Africa, so I'm leaning more towards that. There's certain colors that are no-nos in almost, it depends on which country you're in, but these are generally colors that we find in our flags or things to represent us. So having said that, you know, if you're leaning towards more of the orangey terracotta one, that's one of the reasons why many people see it in the backdrops or part of art or the kente weaves and stuff like that. So I thought I'll give an explanation and then you can take it from there.
Thank you, Joyce. I think one of the things that we discussed earlier was the goal of keeping the exact design and ideally matching the colors and
So I think this sort of
and
meets
keep
the
it,
criteria.
and we're not changing the overall, which was one of the reasons I think we all felt so deeply that we didn't like the large scale panels. And so what we will be exploring via staff and Jerome, the artist, is trying to replicate as is,
Yes.
size-wise, space-wise, color-wise,
Yes.
the original design.
I think the original deluxe design is perfect, but I was uncomfortable with the color that we saw.
Yeah, I think
the time.
I think we all were.
Would you say that I wouldn't call that gold? Would you call that yellow?
It'd be
'Cause-
yellow. I mean, these colors, what's there is perfect, but if we were going to go with the original design, we would have had to aesthetically bound it with something bronzy,
Yeah.
goldy color, you know, and even then it was kind of jarring. to
Disjointed,
me.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
So I think that, again, I think just to reiterate for people at home and in here, that our goal, I think, of the committee that we have taken away is that we're sending staff off with the job of trying to figure out if we can replicate through outdoor tiles and a better installation of those tiles versus like the plastic thinner tiles of the exact design. And so we're going to try to get with Jerome and then look at some numbers and look at installation techniques so that we can stay. I think it was very clear from this committee that we do not want to change the mosaic style of the display on the top of the art. The other thing we discussed, and I'll just go over it real quickly, and then we can we'll send the minutes, was that we discussed trying to figure out a little bit more collaboration in the next steps that would happen on any other slave cemeteries, including at the next meeting. We will take a vote to, we'll wordsmith some things, but take a vote to expand the mission statement of the committee, and then that will go to the mayor and the council for a vote, and that we'll figure out some type of wording that will include any other historic African enslaved or black cemeteries that are discovered within the city bounds. The big one that we have been talking about is on Lafayette, where the new PHA development in conjunction with the Episcopal Church in Haven is going. We know there's a small marked site there, and then there's another one over on Ocean Road. So figuring out via the cemetery committee staff and the RSAs what the city can and cannot do, and then meeting with the property owners and figuring out kind of the next steps to that. And I think that was pretty much covered the synopsis of the meeting.
I have one question. Is
Yes.
there anything more at Greenland besides the judges, owner judge and the family?
I don't know.
Do you know?
No, I don't.
I'll double
We have
check.
37 cemeteries here in Portsmouth that are all colonial cemeteries. So, I mean, I knew she was out there, but I haven't.
Okay. I'll double check. I'm just.
Yeah, no, that's all right. It would be interesting.
Yeah. I know there's been, and I guess we can also talk about this maybe in conjunction with the Black Heritage Trail within this committee, that there's been a lot of conversation of wanting to, I think everyone in this room knows is her story and her backstory, but there's been a lot of desire to elevate that story. I think it's a very fundamental story of the foundation of our nation. When you talk about our key founding father and a absconded slave that he tried to get back for a very long time, and him and his wife, and I think it is a very important story. So maybe that is something that this committee can also, discuss on how maybe in conjunction with the Public Art Committee or Black Heritage Trail and some of the organizations of figuring out a way as a city we can make sure that story is told. And that might be a great tie-in for some of the schools, because I know that there's a lot of kids in our schools that don't even know that story. And it's a very important story.
We have a direct tie because of John Langdon.
Yeah.
He put her up for a long time and then hid her.
And then hit her, and then
He's the signer of the Constitution.
yes, and wrote letters that said, "Do not come back and try to get her."
Yeah.
We're working on it.
Yes, but so
We have many things in the works.
yes, so I think in conjunction, if we can make sure we loop the city in on a little bit of that to figure out how the city too can play, honor in that role, her in that role, and what you guys are doing, I think that'd be great.
It might be a little embarrassing for some, though, right?
I think it's okay.
It's just fine.
I think it's
Not for me personally, but I think there are
I
some
mean,
who...
there are some people who think that Piscataqua is an English word, so you can't.
No, I'm talking about the correspondence with George Washington.
Yes.
And how hard he tried to
Oh, yeah.
get her back.
Oh,
That's the embarrassing part, I think. And
Well, we say
for me, it's not an
we
issue.
say that, but I also think it's a somewhat point of pride for a lot of people of how much was done within this community to
Yes.
not have her go back. But again,
There'd have to be kind of a balance, though.
Yeah.
I think.
I think what was done 300-400 years ago is what was done there. It's not a reflection on anybody.
If we hold on to the
Going
embarrassment,
forward.
then we won't talk about it.
Right.
Yeah.
So
No,
But
I'm
I
just
agree.
making
I
a
agree.
statement. I'm not
Oh,
saying-
no. We don't
I'm
think
saying
you.
that I believe that,
No, I think anytime you discuss history under a microscope of current social norms, it gets people uncomfortable. I mean, you try to remind people that, up until the 1990s, women were property of their dads and their husbands. And so until,
Even more recently than that.
Yeah.
My mother couldn't even have a checking account of her own.
exactly. But this feels like a group that could talk all day about these things. So if there's no other public comment, no, you're good? Okay. Yes,
Because the history and art
you know the rules. You helped to write them.
Chris Dwyer from 600 Broad Street. The History and Art Committee there was a mural of Ona Judge.
Yes.
Are you guys
We're still working on it. It's a lot of getting the money and the building and restoring the brick, and it's a whole
Where were you thinking?
on the side of our building.
Okay,
brick
that's what I thought it was.
side
'cause
of
you
our
could-
building,
you'd
the
be able to
Pleasant
see
Street side.
all-
Yeah,
Yes.
there's a lot of complications. I think we're working on it. I don't know all the details because it's not a project that it's one of the things I'm trying to not become too involved in, but I know that it has to do with money and the brick. And
That was
yeah.
the second project that I believe they funded after the Ruth Blay, right?
Yes, yes.
And remember, you certainly don't want to paint on brick, but the Ruth Blay is
It's vinyl.
It's vinyl.
Yeah, I think there's still something that needs to be done to the brick
To the brick
underneath
before
it
it's
before you
put
do
on.
anything else. Our building is kind of in rough shape.
Yeah.
I'm sure you all know. So there's stuff that needs to be done to the brick before anything else needs to be done, and that can be done on it. And there's a lot of money involved. So we are working on it.
So, well, that's a perfect
And
place for
this
it.
one over here is the model of Ona Judge.
So, well, that's the perfect place for it because it is vinyl. Potentially, if it takes you a long time to do the brick, it could be put someplace else because those are reproducible fairly easily.
Yeah, yeah.
Or it might be nice to even once the rendering is done, to get I would donate to get a light, a projected version
I
put
think
on.
you'll find your ordinances prohibit that. I think
Can
that, I
change
think
that.
that should be changed, but. they
Yeah, I
currently
think it should be
prohibit
changed too.
that. Yeah.
Put it on the governance list.
Maybe
there's a-
something we need to discuss with our neighbors as well. We're very close to them. Or they're
Physically.
very close to us physically.
But I do think that is actually, Chris, you bring up a good example of that as something to have conversation with maybe staff and myself, and we can look at when we're trying to do public art like this, where it's prohibitive, and how, as we're trying to, there's constant conversation about all of the old murals or old business signs on brick that you can no longer do, and how much do we not want done, and how much do we actually find it revitalizing. And
A mural ordinance is on our list for park because it's too complicated to deal with them as signs because of First Amendment issues, but dealing with it as a separate mural ordinance, which this would apply to as well, is more a way to navigate that.
I'm sure. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I would look, if there's nothing else, look for a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Second. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Thank you guys so much.